Fidelity. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the exploration of consciousness, who we are becoming as an evolutionary race, as an evolving species of awakened humans. And that's why I'm talking today to Bentinho Massaro. How would you describe your perspective?
Definitely has always felt, since I can remember, that I have a wider view than most people around me. So it would translate into this feeling of everything is possible, and just a sense of clarity and wide openness and spaciousness. And I mean, yeah, there's many things I could say about my perspective. I mean, let's get more specific maybe.
Well, it's like, okay, I agree there's people coming in with these wider views, but how do you teach that? I mean, you give workshops, you give talks, but is it teachable or is it transmitted somehow?
No, it's definitely teachable. And, you know, I had to do a lot of remembering. I had to do a lot of unlearning. And I guess the advantage that I've had, if anything, is that there is a stronger sense of needing to remember something. But the process of awakening is the same, regardless of where you come from or what your native perspective is, so to speak.
So your process of awakening, I remember you saying somewhere on a tape that 14 or 10, you had this perspective of these other levels of reality. Is that what was the beginning of that?
Not even so much, no. I've never been extremely extra-dimensionally oriented necessarily, or even psychically oriented. It's been more of a sort of a down-to-earth desire and a deep yearning of wanting to know the absolute truth, wanting to know the source of all things, rather than waste time on one thing in particular. So I really wanted to get down to the core truth behind all things.
So what is that source? What have you discovered as the source?
It's me.
It's you. You being what do you mean by you or me or yeah?
Well, at that level of speech, me is the absolute. Me is God, and beyond.
Like me or anyone who is the me is that God.
The innermost sense of me in anyone, if you trace that back far enough, it's kind of like this very long tunnel. You know, and reality is out there. Like if you imagine yourself looking through this really long pipe, and it's the absolute that looks through the pipe and that sees the world out here sort of happen. Maybe you trace that tunnel of that innermost sense of me, which you always have. There's always an experience, or there's that sense of me. You can either be focused externally on what you're experiencing, or you can really get to know the knower itself, really go deeply within. And as you trace that sense of me back throughout each level of consciousness and each configuration of energy or experience, you can always distill the me. It's like constant alchemy. Like out of this equation, out of this vibrational experience, still doesn't matter what form it takes. It can be higher dimensional. It can be more like heaven than earth. It can be more non-physical. But still in that equation, there's two fundamental elements going on, which is you can either be focused on what you're experiencing or on the fact that you're experiencing, or who it is that is experiencing.
Right.
So that constantly going within, constantly turning around, inquiring into the who it is that is aware of the equation. It is like going through that tunnel. And if you follow this deep enough, you will have the amazing realization that you are the absolute. Me is absolute, not the little me of the bundle of thoughts of me. But
because if you follow what you're experiencing, there will always be a reaction to that, a drama, a story. But that, I mean, I really appreciate that perspective. That you are experiencing is the me-ness, the thatness.
yes.
But is that individualized as a me? When you go all the ways back there, do you merge with the collective? Or, and this is a question I've asked many teachers, and they have many different answers. Is it individualized me? I mean, yes, of course, we're part of the great ocean of being, but does that retain the you-ness of the me?
It depends on how deep you go. The deeper you go, the less of you there will be, and the more all that you can say that remains at some point is only the absolute is, and there is nothing else. But you know, you can speak in more relative terms, and depending on what level we're we're assuming ourselves to be, or what level we're zoomed into, so to speak, we will feel individualized to that extent. But the deeper you go, first you go through layers of like feeling more authentically who you are as a true individual, because you're going beyond sort of this shallow ego, the ego of just thoughts, words, labels, descriptions. And you get in touch with this core sense of who you are as an individuated expression of the all, that crystallized, pure stream from source. But again, distill further, who is me in this equation? Who is me in this equation? And eventually, like, everything disappears, the world, creation, and there's this indescribable sense of infinite perfection and infinite transcendence.
So are you living on those levels at once? Are you aware of that deep me and also the personality me?
Yeah, I call it true simultaneity.
So it affects your functioning and being in the world, because basically you're sourcing from that deep me.
Yes.
And so
you're playing roles.
Yeah.
After, like, when this realization begins to dawn and begins to marinate in you, begins to mature, you no longer have a life of your own. There's no such sense of having a life of your own. So there's, instead of wanting things or desiring things, there's a detecting benefit, a natural wisdom, that skillfulness and intelligence that through your body and your mind detects where's the highest benefit to be generated by what form of speech or no speech, thought or no thought, action or no action. And it can look like anything, you know.
yeah, but was there a point in your experience where that crystallizes, like, oh my God? And is that keep going, that experience? I mean, you don't want to stop
it's still going. It's still unfolding. Yeah.
What was the moment where you got that was the essence of you, sort of? Was there?
Different stages,
okay.
different ways. I would say the first time probably around the age of 18.
I'm just always interested in that trigger point where, like, suddenly someone drops into, like, oh my God, this is a bigger picture than I thought.
Okay, well, there's one example I could use. This is about 5 or 6 years ago. At that point, I had been teaching about this field of consciousness that we all are, and I was teaching people something similar, but I was teaching them to relax back into the sense of presence awareness. But something happened at some point which I had no exposure to in the teachings or communities around me. It was kind of a unique dawning. And so it confused me for a little while. I was just observing it happen, but basically what happened is that this sense of pure being that we generally try to get to, you know, awakening, enlightenment is like, is typically, at least in mainstream, it's about getting to this sense of presence awareness and this non-identified space of pure consciousness. But what started to happen is this weird sensation. It's not really a sensation, but it's very difficult to describe, but it's like the sense of being itself started to become an object instead of being the subject.
A sense. You had an object being a sensation?
Yeah, so my sense of being consciousness became, it's like it popped out of me and suddenly consciousness itself appeared in front of me. Like the field of consciousness itself, the subject itself turned into an object, became another appearance. And it came with a sense of, I'm tired of being. I'm tired of presence. I'm tired of consciousness. So what then dawned on me, or what revealed itself to me, is something that was more profound than that, something older than God.
Older than God.
Something older than...
I think I'll call this video Older Than God.
Nice.
What can you give a sense of what that means? Because, I mean, I don't know what people's definition of God is, but it is. But,
so if I would say God is the creation, the creator aspect of the one absolute. So as I see it from the one infinite absolute, indescribable, the first distortion or expression that arose from that is awareness. From awareness then arose this field of love, because in that state it still knows that it's only one. So any manifestation out of that realization of oneness would be this field of love. This field of love is formless, and after some time in timelessness, this awareness, this intelligence, this free agency, this God will generate out of this field of formless love, it will start to generate patterns, and this is what we call light. So I see awareness, love, and light as the three only ingredients. Or you could roughly translate that to Satchidananda, if you're familiar with the Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So it's this ocean of awareness, love, light, out of which everything projects itself as form, as creation, as experience, and all the different densities come into being and all that. So I would say that's God, that field of the Creator from which things are projected and created, back into which things...
So the projector is sort of God, that we're the source, but you're saying older than that is...
Older than that is something that cannot be described. It's beyond consciousness, it's beyond experiencing, it's beyond perception. But when it's realized, it makes typical enlightenment look like nothing. It's this indescribable... It's not even a sense, it's you're waking up to the actual absolute. And the experience can be described as... It is as if you pop out of creation itself, not just the personal ego, but all of creation with all the dimensions, all the densities. It's like you graduate from that. It's like a complete homecoming back into the source before anything was ever created.
Yeah, I think the Kabbalah calls that the Ein Sof, the beyond knowledge, the place of pure being, as if you've studied Kabbalah at all.
I have not, no.
Okay. But that place is something, of course, we all have, but it's like, is that still coming and going for you, or are you there on that, whatever level you're there?
So the conscious mind's focus can come or go, but what I am is that. Like, there's no coming and going of the absolute.
So the difference between you is that you know that, and most people are still trying to find that.
Yeah, I guess.
Would you say? But what I love about your teaching and work is that you speak to a sort of millennial crowd that, in a way, doesn't have the baggage of old spirituality or religion. Of course, they're also missing a bit of tradition you're bringing to them, but speak to the fact that somehow that generation seems wide open to something new.
Yeah.
What do you notice?
So I would say that so we're stepping it down to a relative level, which is great. I'm totally open to that.
No, we'll go back to that a little bit.
Anyway, this is your
I'm just
interview.
curious.
I'm just here.
No.
Yes, absolutely. So the millennials, or the new generation, obviously, what's relevant for them is to figure out not so much what they are absolutely speaking, although that can never hurt, but more who they are, why they're here, what is their unique theme and blueprint and expression and gift to this world at this timing. Because we can observe within this relative creation and this timing on Earth, we can observe that there is a transition happening, and it's happening fast. And in order to facilitate that change, there's a whole wave of wanderers, if you will, old souls that are coming in to assist in this process, which is what I think you're referring to a little bit.
Yeah, and they seem really fresh, but they lack, maybe that's my own problem, they lack a historical context for a spiritual awakening, in a sense, which is okay. We can throw that out. But
Right. Well, eventually, that will, in a sense, catch up with them. If it truly is an imbalance, it will catch up with them, and they'll learn that later on, inevitably.
So the relationship between the relative, like where we're awakening to something, and the absolute, which is always and forever is, how do you see the progression of the timeline sequences with the awakening of consciousness in relationship to the absolute? Is that something being directed, or is it just unfolding? Yeah.
If you picture a black hole, out of which creation emerges, as well as coalesces back into, you could see the entire creation as that. If you want to visualize the Big Bang, for example, the expansion of the universe, then reaching sort of the farthest edges of evolution, the most crystallized way. Let me back up for a sec. The main intention of this creation being for the one original infinite creator to be able to know itself. Because in its original state, it doesn't know itself. It's stateless. It's absolutely stateless. So it needs the illusion of other. It needs the illusion of manifestation. It needs the illusion of evolution, of individuation, of experience and catalyst to, through that process, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. It's like the absolute entering into a dream, and then the dream begins to evolve and evolve. Mm-hmm. The dream becomes more and more lucid and more lucid. And then the shift into the absolute could be compared to, instead of being super lucid inside the dream, actually waking up, the dream disappears, and you know what you are.
Right.
So that would be the analogy of the entire creation reaching a sufficient spiritual mass or realization to where it coalesces back into the black hole. And on the other end of that black hole, so to speak, is me, you, it.
And that's the formless, that's the foreverness of being. But it also seems there's something else going on. I mean, I don't know from my relative point, but I had a teacher who said, we're here to make known the unknown. So creation is here to know itself, but it doesn't know what it doesn't know, just like we don't know. So as we become creative beings and spark more access to unknown potential, we're adding to creation. And so in a way, the universe is yet to be created. And the potentiality is still growing into unknown possibilities.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
well, how does something infinite express itself? It has to be in infinite ways. So there's no end to the expression. There's no end to the dream. After a dream coalesces back into the one absolute, it reemerges after an unimaginable time spent in timelessness, where consciousness is in abeyance back into source. Another universe is generated, with everything being learned, being re-implemented in a new way. So that never ends. The expression of what's infinite never ends, because the expression has to be infinite.
right, so it's growing every minute, in a sense.
You could say that. Yeah.
Because I guess I came from an old way of thinking, like, oh yeah, the universe is just sort of remembering what it already knew, or God, whatever you want to call it. But yet it seems with the creative force, no, I can create something that had never existed before, even in the mind of God, or wherever. Maybe it did, but I'm saying as we, I think you use the term flower into our humanity, the creative expression becomes alive, and we add to creation in unknown ways.
Absolutely. And even if we're not aware, we do that inevitably. Every second that we experience is the creator having another experience of itself through these little portals that we call me.